Hello and welcome to Addressing the Challenges of Informational Text Reading, the first of 3 webcasts in the series Fostering Student Success on the OAT Reading, Grades 5 through 7, Reading and Writing Informational Text. This series is designed to support Grades 5 through 7 English Language Arts and Reading teachers who want to enhance their instruction and improve student performance in the classroom and on the OAT. My name is Sheila Cantleberry, Reading Content Specialist for the Ohio Resource Center. Today, we will be discussing some of the challenges our students face when reading informational text. We'll suggest ways to integrate informational text into daily instruction, and we'll share techniques to support student comprehension. Before we begin, I'd like to draw your attention to the Submit a Question button. You have the opportunity to join our discussion. Submit your questions early, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end of the live webcast. You'll also find support materials, including a viewing guide, a webcast handout, ORC mini collections and suggestions for grades 5 through 7 trade books, as well as suggestions for professional reading. Now, let's meet our panelists for today's webcast. Marcia Barnhart is an English Language Arts consultant with the Ohio Department of Education. She taught secondary English for 18 years, was an English department chair for 10 years, and an assistant principal for 1 year. Rachel Ader is a regional literacy consultant for the State Support Team, Region 11, working on behalf of the Educational Service Center of Franklin County. Rachel previously worked as a 7th grade language arts teacher, and Brenda Doyle is a 6th grade teacher at Orange Middle School in the Olentangy School District. She taught in the elementary grades for 10 years and served as a literacy facilitator in the Columbus Public Schools. Marcia, Rachel, and Brenda, welcome.
Thank you.
I know our panelists are eager to share with you some of their thoughts on the important role of informational text in the English Language Arts classroom. Let's start today, though, by clarifying just what we mean by the term informational text. If we look at the professional literature, we will often see the terms informational, nonfiction, and expository used to describe the same kinds of text. In today's instruction, it seems that informational text is a more inclusive term than nonfiction. It includes not only books and periodicals, but also such things as newspapers, advertising, brochures, instructions, most websites, maps, charts, really all the visual elements that provide information for the reader. And it seems that this more inclusive definition is supported by Ohio's English Language Arts content standards. Marcia, how is this broader definition or understanding of informational text reflected in the standards?
Well, Sheila, the English Language Arts academic content standards include 10 main standards, as we know. The one standard that connects most obviously to our topic of informational text is the Reading Application Standard, which focuses on informational, technical, and persuasive text. In addition, we have the Reading Process Standard and the Acquisition of Vocabulary Standard that also propose skills that teachers can utilize to teach comprehension and interpretation of informational text. But it's really important to keep in mind that our standards are set up so that in the early grade level, students are really learning mainly basic reading skills. And by the time they reach 5th, 6th, and 7th grade, the skills are much more cognitively demanding. For example, they are asked to identify an author's perspective, an author's viewpoint, and it seems that this is when the students begin to really struggle with informational text.
It is true that students struggle with informational text. Over the past several years, especially since the ELA content standards have been adopted, teachers have been focusing more of their instruction around informational text because it does vary from instruction around fiction. We do know, though, that it's not just for the success on the OAT that students need to understand the purpose and the use of informational text. Think about how much of your daily reading involves informational text. I know for me, it's more than 80% of the time. After all, we live in an informational age, And just going into a library or a local bookstore and looking at the shelves will show you that there's been a huge explosion of informational text that's available even to young adult or juvenile readers. We also know that academic achievement is linked to a student's ability to read and write informational text. So these skills will prepare students for future success. Something else to think about is that these kinds of texts are available on a variety of levels and around a variety of interest levels. And informational text use does open the classroom door to research and to the inquiry process. Quite frankly, there are students who prefer informational text to fiction, and so it's important to have those offerings available for students. I would say that as a former language arts teacher that I appreciated informational text because it does help students to build their vocabulary and their background knowledge, and those are two really important parts of an English language arts classroom.
Thank you, all very key points. Now, Brenda, you are a classroom teacher. What are some of the challenges that you notice students are having when they're reading informational text?
I think many times students can feel intimidated by informational text. It could be because they lack background knowledge, because they're not familiar with the text features that are in the text to support it, like maybe bolded text, italicized, charts and graphs that support the information. Sometimes they're not familiar with the text structures like compare and contrast or problem solution. All of these together, these challenges together or separately, can make it difficult for students to determine importance in text, to hold on to information, or to really develop a deeper understanding beyond just a literal recall.
Well, knowledge of text features and text structures are directly addressed in the standards. Marcia, any suggestions for how students can really use these as an aid to comprehension?
Sure. It's easy for teachers to interchange the words sometimes, text features, text structures, and so we need to separate the fact that text features really include aspects of text such as headings, photographs, illustrations, maps, and graphs. And one thing that teachers can do to help students with this type of an aspect of text is to have them focus on those aspects before they read, which helps them predict what will follow in the text. And also, an awareness of text structures helps comprehension significantly as well. For example, the way the author organizes the information in the text, whether it be compare, contrast, cause and effect. And teachers can help students focus in on signal words that alert them to the fact that this particular text is organized in this manner because they see words such as in comparison or on the other hand. So those text structures also really help.
So it sounds as though what Brenda and Marcia are both emphasizing is that students need support all the way through the reading process, before they read, during the reading, and after the reading when they need to demonstrate that understanding. Now, Rachel, as a literacy coach, you are in and out of many classrooms. Are there some key practices for informational reading that you see that are very successful?
Sure. There are plenty of pre-reading strategies or before-reading strategies that I see, and those strategies work to help support students engage in the reading process. I would say the three strategies I would identify would be having a purpose, so setting a purpose for your reading, also previewing a text in advance, and then using a knowledge reading chart. Setting a purpose allows students to begin their reading with the end in mind, so they know the direction they're going. I think we've all read text before that's been challenging for us and can agree that if you know what it is you're supposed to be getting out of the text or the reason for your reading, it can help you to make it through a difficult passage. An extension of setting a purpose would be previewing the text. Before students read a textbook, they really should take time to look out for a few particulars. As Marcia mentioned, looking at headings to identify the main ideas is important. Also, identifying the text structure can help a student understand the information being presented. So, is the passage compare and contrast? Is it cause and effect? Is the information presented in a sequential order? Those are things students should be looking out for. Additionally, and maybe one of the most underused strategies, is having students pay attention to text features. Looking at the charts and graphs, maps, diagrams, illustrations in advance of reading the material can help students have a deeper, more rich understanding of the information. I would also say that it's critical for students to pay attention to those questions that you find throughout a text as you're pre-reading. Not only can it help you set a purpose for your reading because you know what you need to get out of the reading, but it can also help to frame your understanding of the text that you're about to encounter. The final strategy, I would say, is using a knowledge rating chart. And there's an example that can be found in the webcast mini collection. A knowledge rating chart allows students to access that prior knowledge and determine what their knowledge is of vocabulary concepts or general concepts around the information included in the reading. Not only is this an activity that can be done before the reading, but it's a kind of activity that can be done across reading. And by that I mean that during reading, students can come back and maybe tweak their knowledge piece. And after reading, they can reflect back upon exactly what they learned through the reading. So for teachers, a knowledge rating chart also serves a few important purposes. One would be that it allows the teacher to see the load trends across the class. That will help the teacher know when a lesson may need extended or when some differentiation needs to occur. For students, too, they're able to identify their specific areas of weakness and to be able to see their learning over time. Most importantly, though, a knowledge rating chart will allow a student to really connect with the reading and have some reading success.
Well, those are some excellent pre-reading strategies for informational text, and they illustrate how important it is to prime students for reading before reading ever begins, so they know what they're reading, why it's important, and how it connects to their own prior learning and experiences. Now, I'd like to go back to something Brenda said earlier about students having trouble with, she said, holding on to information while they're reading. Certainly, all of us have had that experience of reading a few paragraphs, maybe even a few pages, and realizing that we just don't comprehend the meaning of what we're reading. And for students, this difficulty with comprehension can be even more profound. So, we've touched on some key pre-reading steps, such as previewing, setting a purpose, all those things that will help students become more effective readers. Now, let's talk about how we can continue to support them as we move into that during reading process. Brenda, anything in that area?
Well, sure. Of course, I try to use the teaching strategies that I've gained from the ORC website. And there are a few tools and techniques that I like to use to help keep students engaged in reading and read actively through text. One tool that I like to use that is included in the webcast handouts is a reading bookmark that was developed by my literacy facilitator in my building. It includes reading strategies that are good for before reading, during reading, and after reading, but I'll focus on the during reading today. The first activity or strategy that they have the students do is read and retell. This is a great strategy for students because after they read a certain amount of text or a chunk of text, it allows them to think about the text and then have to organize the information that they've read and put it into their own words. So it goes beyond just a question and answer activity. The next strategy that I have students have is, of course, questioning, because questioning is so important in their reading. If students feel that they already know what they've read, sometimes I ask them to think of a question that a teacher may pose. It allows them to be active in their reading and to extend their reading process. Actually, when we're done reading, then it poses a topic or allows us to have a discussion about what questions were answered and weren't answered as they continue to read. And finally, what I think is probably the most difficult one is for students to make an analogy where they're connecting the new information they learned to something that they already know. This is great for extending as an extension for students that are really strong readers and that feel very comfortable with the text.
That bookmark is something students can use on their own and learn the habits of an efficient reader, and so that's something they can use independently. Are there some ways that you try to prepare your students when there's a specific reading assignment coming up?
Yeah, I like to use a reading roadmap. The reading roadmap really helps students navigate through particularly difficult or dense text. It makes students pause, slow down, and reflect on what they've read. The reading roadmap is included in the webcast handouts that I've created for my students. The reading roadmap allows the teacher to chunk the text or to separate the text in ways to add reading strategies with that, to pair reading strategies with that, that allows the students to really concentrate or focus on a specific content. It makes them slow down and really think about what they're reading instead of just going from the beginning to the end. Also, students can create their own reading roadmap for a partner. This is something that after they've had practice with reading roadmaps, students really enjoy doing. When they create a reading roadmap, they really have to have a deep understanding of the text. They have to know what's important in the text, and they have to think about the text structure, because that allows them to think of strategies that they can incorporate and have their partner do. Like if there was comparing and contrasting going on in the text, they could ask their partner to create a Venn diagram.
So when do you decide that you're going to use that roadmap? What makes you?
I like to use that roadmap when we're encountering particularly dense text, or if there are new text features being introduced, because I can really have the kids slow down and draw their attention to that, or if there's new content that's being addressed within a subject area.
How about that you mentioned dense text? How about when something is really difficult for them and you're trying to get them through? Any other techniques that you use?
I also love coding, and coding is such an easy way to get students to read actively and be engaged in their text. It's also called the insert technique. And what I do is I have students develop the codes they want to use. We decide as a class for them to mark their text to show what's important, what's interesting, questions that they have, and also what information have they already what information have they read that they already know. So it's sort of supporting what they've known already. And as they code the text, they're able to really think and reflect on what they've read. I chunk the text for the students. I really have them read just a certain passage, and I limit the number of codes they can use, so they really have to be thoughtful in the choices that they make. This leaves us a great talking point in class about what's important and what's interesting, determining importance. It also lets me know what background knowledge did the students already have about the text, and what questions are they still thinking about when they're finished.
And Sheila, I'd like to sort of piggyback on what Brenda had to say and talk about the graphic organizer as a tool. I don't imagine that there are many teachers who haven't heard about a KWL chart or a Venn diagram, but in my experience, being in and out of a variety of classrooms, typically what I see is that teachers pass out a graphic organizer and don't ever really go beyond that. Really, a better approach would be an approach that can actually demonstrate a student's understanding of the text would be to allow students to select or even create graphic organizers that actually represent the text structure. That actual idea, though, does require instruction from the teacher, modeling, and a variety of different kinds of guided practice around many different kinds of graphic organizers to prepare students. The benefit of this, though, is that students will have a hook onto which they can attach both their previous knowledge and the new knowledge that they gain. And as Brenda alluded to, informational text can often be dense. So this is a strategy that can especially help struggling students as they find some efficacy in their own work.
Well, speaking of graphic aids and visual tools, I like to use anchor charts in my classroom. Anchor charts are what students create to really reaffirm what we've learned in class or class ideas that we have, and students can use those anchor charts as reminders, or they can use them to link the new information they have to what they've learned before. So they're reference points that the students use in class throughout the year, and it's really enables them to have the concrete knowledge that we've gained together with the content that we've learned, and it allows them to go back and reference that throughout the year and make connections.
Oh, I like that. It's really adding to that text-rich environment that we want to have for the students and giving them some things they can use right there in the classroom. What about some ways to keep students actively reading by taking advantage of their social nature and having them support each other during the reading phase, during reading phase particularly?
Well, Sheila, I think that collaboration is a great way to get students engaged in the learning process. If students feel like they have someone directly supporting them, encountering the text at the same time that they are, they do feel more support. Although I would caution that when using any kind of cooperative learning strategy, it's important to have a few constants. Two would be to always assign roles. so the people participating in that cooperative learning really know what's expected of them. But also be very clear about the expectations for the learning process and what the students are to get out of it. I think we've all been in group situations where we've had to maybe pull a little bit more than our weight, and we don't want students to have to encounter that. There are 3 strategies, though, that I would highlight specifically. The first would be paired reading. And in paired reading, students can self-select a partner, or a teacher can more strategically select someone of the same or different skill level, or students who have varying or different interest levels, just depending on what the purpose of the activity is. After those partners have been selected, then the students take turns reading the text out loud to each other. I often suggest, too, that teachers use this opportunity for students to ask and answer questions in between switching off reading between the pairs. I think it's a good time to be able to pull a variety of background knowledge from those 2 students working together. Another strategy that I would highlight is reciprocal teaching. And in this 4-part strategy, the leadership role really switches from the teacher to the student. And those 4 strategies that students and the teacher work on in this would be summarizing, asking questions, clarifying, and predicting. Now, students get engaged in this strategy because who doesn't like to ask their teacher a question and sort of be in charge of the class? So this approach really does encourage some engagement in the text. Students want to read it well so they can participate in those 4 strategies. The final strategy is one of my favorites, I'll have to say, and it's called the tea party strategy. And there are actually specific directions in the webcast mini collection for people who are interested in more information about this strategy. But in short, the purpose of this activity is for students to hear snippets of and make predictions about the text that they will read in advance of reading it. So just a short description is that students are given small portions of text. They read that to a partner reads their different text back, and the students work collaboratively to draw conclusions about what that entire text may be about. This is a strategy that can be used across the reading experience as well, because students can spend time after they've worked sharing their individual passages, maybe drawing conclusions as a small group about the entire text, and as they're reading and after they're reading, they can come back and confirm or correct the predictions that they actually made.
Oh, I like Tea Party too. It's motivational for them. It's just fun, and it really gets them thinking. But I think all these practices that we've been talking about for supporting students during reading help them comprehend and retain information. And I'd like to add that there are many collections in the supplemental webcast materials that have many more ideas for all stages of the reading process. So those will be there for you, and we can move on, I think, now to the after reading stage, and that's where we typically conduct our assessments and give students an opportunity to demonstrate what they've comprehended. Marcia, could you share some of the findings that you and your colleagues at ODE see when you examine the results of the OAT?
Sure, Sheila. I'd be happy to. The one part that I think is very important for teachers to keep in mind is that with the 6th and 7th grade OAT, each test is comprised of 5 reading passages, and 3 of those, or 60% of the test, does come from informational text. So this is an indication of the fact that we do value and want teachers to emphasize informational text in the classroom. When we look at the questions that students seem to really struggle with in this grade band, we find that the most troublesome benchmark is when the student is required to identify the author's perspective, the author's viewpoint, the author's purpose. And this makes sense. This is a higher level skill that would require some synthesis of ideas as opposed to a literal recall type question. But they do really seem to struggle with that type of question. They need to be able to identify what is a fact versus an opinion and be able to determine that the author is using the facts to support his opinion. And that is a fine line that it often causes them a lot of trouble. Let's take a look at a typical question from an OAT that would deal with this type of a benchmark. Why does the author end the passage with the story of the bald eagle? In this type of question, you can see that the student is required to think about the author's purpose. why the author placed this particular anecdote at the end of the story. If you look at the responses that are available for the student, responses A, B, and C all seem very reasonable, but the fact that response D gets behind the author's intent to show readers how rewarding the work at Nature's Nursery can be capitalizes on the fact that we are getting to the author's purpose. And one thing that teachers can do to help students find this fine line is to deconstruct the text sentence by sentence and find out exactly where the persuasive techniques come into play so that they find the difference between a fact and an opinion of the author.
That's difficult for them. Are there any other benchmarks that cause them problems?
Another benchmark that we've discovered causes a lot of problem for students is the summarization benchmark. And in a summary benchmark, students are required to identify the main ideas and separate them from the details which support those main ideas. And that's often very difficult for them to do. Let's look at another test question that is based on this benchmark of summarization. This is a typical question you might find. The student is asked to read the summary that is already provided, and then the student is asked to look at a list of 4 choices and select which piece of information will best complete the summary. So the French settlers spent their first winter in small cabins in the spring. They learned to cultivate crops, fell trees, and hunt for food. Which detail would we add to that to make it a more complete summary is a typical question we might see. Now, if you examine responses A, B, and C, you'll notice that they are details, while D is a more comprehensive, larger, broader idea. And helping students see this distinction is very critical for them in terms of understanding and comprehending informational text.
Okay, good, thank you. Well, we have been receiving a few email questions from our viewers, and I don't want our time to run out without taking some of them. So let's try to answer as many as we can in the time we have left. Okay, here's one. What is the name of an author of high-quality informational text that will engage my students?
I'll take that one. One of my favorite authors of informational text is Lynn Curley, and you spell his last name C-U-R-L-E-E. Not only does he write engaging text about subjects like Mount Rushmore or baseball parks or the Brooklyn Bridge or the Statue of Liberty, but he also illustrates the text, and the paintings are quite riveting. All students need to see to be hooked in the text. For example, is a gentleman dangling from cables over Mount Rushmore carving a head into the stone face? Quite exciting for students, and definitely does offer an engagement process for students. So if you're starting an informational text library, that would be, Lynn Curley's work would be a great place to start.
Okay, I can tell you really like that author.
I
do. Let's see, here's another one. My students highlight almost everything when I ask them to highlight the most important information. Sounding familiar? Mm-hmm. This person would like to know if you have any suggestions for that problem.
I'd like to take that question because I totally understand. As soon as students get highlighters in their hand, they just want to use them. I think that before you pass out the highlighters, you need to determine the purpose of the reading. Help students understand why they're going to be reading the text, and then pass out the highlighters, chunk just a section of the text and let them know that they're only allowed to highlight one thing, the most important thing, or a detail that supports the most important thing. It's your choice to guide them in what they should be highlighting. It helps them really think about what they need to know, and it determines the purpose of the reading.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're getting a few more. Let's see, here's one. I have taught several of the text structures. My students can identify them if I give them a short passage, but they still have trouble using this to really help them with comprehension. What to do?
Well, I think I'll take this one because it links back to what I spoke of earlier about graphic organizers. It's really important for students to understand the connection between comprehension, what they are to get out of the text, and a graphic organizer. So what does it offer? Sometimes there's a misconception that the graphic organizer is actually doing the instructing when that's actually not the case. So it's really important for that instruction, modeling, and guided practice piece to occur with graphic organizers before students use them. They need to see what kinds of connections and information they'll be able to gain once they use the graphic organizer. That's why that process is a little time consuming but worth the effort because it will aid comprehension in the end.
Okay, great. Let's take one more, and this one I think I can address. It says, can you talk a little more about coding during reading? Is there more information in the handout? If not, please describe it a bit more. I just want to assure our the writer of this question that yes, there's more information in the webcast handout, and you'll find lots of resources in the supplementals for our webcast. And now we are running out of time, but before we close today, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to share any final instructional tip, any last point that teachers can use to help students build their confidence with informational text. So, Brenda, you want to start us out?
Sure. I think mostly teachers just need to be enthusiastic about reading informational text. They need to share the importance of reading informational text with their students because we know that when we read informational text, we gain new knowledge that can affect our decision making. It can change the way we connect to world events, and we need to share that with our students. Reading informational text needs to be part of our daily class instruction. I think our classrooms need to be filled with different kinds of informational text so students understand that it goes beyond just what we find on the internet, that having atlases and reading charts and diagrams, having books of lists, all of that helps us gain a better insight into our own reading and to what's going on around the world.
Okay, thanks. Marcia.
One thing I would like to emphasize as we finish today is the idea that teaching methods often that are conducive to informational texts I'd like to see used as much as possible. For example, the inquiry model or independent learning, questioning and critical thinking, and cross-disciplinary teaching all encourage use of informational text. And really, it compels students to become engaged with the text because they really want to know the answers to these questions. I would highly suggest that teachers work as hard as they can to integrate the teaching of informational text into their units and their themes as opposed to teaching it as an isolated event. Not today we're doing informational text, but informational text is a part of all of our units. And we have to remember that very often informational text is the preferred choice of students. They like to know what's true and factual about the world around them. In a recent article by Abraham and Carter in the English Journal, their research supports the idea that informational text is a major part of self-selection by students. And I just feel it's very important we capitalize on their interest and help make their learning more relevant to their lives.
Absolutely. And Rachel, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that teachers need to build their knowledge base around informational text through wide reading. I know that many teachers are familiar with the Newbery and Caldecott Awards, but fewer teachers are familiar with the Orbis Pictus Award, and that is an honor bestowed by the National Council of the Teachers of English, and it's salutes the best informational textbook and up to 5 honor books each year. There is a criteria that the books are selected around, and that includes accuracy, detail, organization, and style of the books. They're also selected because they would be appropriate in a K through 8 classroom. Utilizing resources that you can find through the Orbis Pictus Award will help to continue to build that library one of our viewers asked about. But I'd like to stress that we all know that teachers can model, and modeling does have an impact on students. So why not model the use of and the love of informational text?
Well, we all seem to be in agreement that both teachers and students need to be immersed in nonfiction reading on a regular basis, and that teachers need to frequently expose their students to all kinds of informational texts. And we also seem to agree that if teachers integrate before, during, and after strategies and techniques into their instruction, students may be better equipped to comprehend the challenging texts they often encounter on state assessments, classroom assignments, and in everyday life. Ladies, this has been a very engaging discussion, and we greatly appreciate the email questions. Thank you so much, Brenda, Rachel, and Marcia, for participating in today's program and sharing.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Great. Well, today we've considered some of the specific challenges students have when reading informational text. We discussed them before, during, and after reading strategies to help them with comprehension, and we shared some instructional best practices to help assure that every student is successful on the OAT. And we sincerely hope you'll continue this conversation with your colleagues. To get you started, there are some post-viewing and self-reflection suggestions included in the webcast handout. Please take advantage of all the supporting materials found on fostering student success on the OAT at www.ohioRC.org/for/ELA/webcast/OAT. And if you would like to learn more about these topics, please contact ORC at web@ohioRC.org. We would be happy to work collaboratively with you to plan building or district-wide professional development programs. For the Ohio Resource Center, I'm Sheila Cannelberry, wishing you success with all of your reading instructional strategies.